I'm Craig Alexander, 5-time Triathlon World Champion, and you're listening to the Physical Performance Show.
And the winner is...
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to another episode of the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Normatec Recovery and Pogo Physio. I trust you've been having a great week, and I hope that you've been enjoying pursuing your physical best performance. On today's episode, I share a conversation with you that I had with Craig Crowie Alexander. For the Australian triathlon fans, for the international triathlon fans, Craig Alexander needs no introduction. Crowie, as he's affectionately known, is a 5 times world triathlon champion. That is 2006 and 2011 world 70.3 or half Ironman triathlon champion. And then also his historic Hawaii Ironman world champion victories in 2008, 2009, and then again in 2011. Not to mention his debut in Hawaii, picking up silver medal with that tussle with previous podcast guest, Macca McCormack. Of course, we cover Crowie's highs, his lows, and the learnings, the many learnings from his incredible athletic career to date. Crowie is articulate, he's meticulous, I'd say, and he's a consummate professional. So get ready for a deep dive where we talk about the early days of Craig's career, his first love with sport, falling in love with the sport of triathlon, working through the formative years, the breakthrough performances that came and why they were special to Craig or Crowie, the challenge around naming an athlete that he most admires, the training principles and practicalities that, of course, everyone wants to know about from Crowie, and then Crowie lays down his physical challenge for the week. So let's do it. Let's jump in with Craig Crowie Alexander. Craig Crowie Alexander, this is an absolute pleasure from my end. So thanks for jumping on the Physical Performance Show. Your name has come up as a requested guest for some time, well and truly over a year and a half. And so I know your time's precious. So I'm going to throw straight into the first question. What's one thing that Craig Crowie Alexander is learning at the moment?
Firstly, mate, thanks for having me on. One thing I'm learning at the moment is all these new cycling softwares that everybody's using in training. I'm very old school with my training methods and techniques, but I just signed on for Zwift and actually rode a lap of London before I chatted to you. So trying to get a handle on all these new age training techniques, and they're a lot of fun, to be honest.
Crowie, I feel comforted that I'm not the only one that feels a little bit on the back foot there. To me, stationary trainers were wind trainers, and I'm looking to try and get across the technology myself. But you obviously enjoyed it, and do you see yourself doing more of the Swift smart trainer type stuff?
I think so. You know, I'm just at that stage of life with 3 young kids and a few other things going on that time's a bit harder to come by. And I think I've always felt that training on the indoor trainer or the stationary trainer, the wind trainer, whatever you want to call it was very time effective and just useful. You know, no training lights. You didn't have to deal with traffic or weather. You could really dial up the parameters of and the specificity of a session. So from that aspect, I always felt indoor training was good. But I just think this new software adds another element to it. It's a little bit more engaging. You can train with people remotely or in the virtual world, so to speak. It's a nice way to connect with athletes all over the world. So, yeah, I think I can definitely see myself doing a lot more of it.
Crowie, you just mentioned your old school and your approach. I did have a smile on my face in researching for this episode recording where I saw you writing in a a yearly diary with the 7 days across 2 pages, and I still, despite all the modern technologies, I still diarise my training in the same method. So is that how you still keep track of your work? I mean, obviously there's Training Peaks and digital platforms, but what's your preference?
Yeah, at different times I used Training Peaks, and I think it was useful. It had its place for sure for sort of archiving your different training blocks and sessions. But I always liked just the ritual or the routine of handwriting it in the diary. It was part of a little system that I had. It was another way of reinforcing to myself how much work that I was putting in. And so there was a little method to my madness. I know a lot of people used to laugh because I used to have the handwritten diary that I'd cart all around the world with me. But yeah, as I said, it was a little ritual. I had it. It sort of reinforced to me the work that I was putting in. And, a long time ago, my wife suggested to me that it might be a good idea to read that diary in the week leading up to big races. So I started doing that a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago. And it served me well. It was always reassuring just to read through the handwritten notes and see how much training and how much time had been dedicated to a race preparation.
And so that became, from what year forwards did you take up Nerida's advice there? Was that, after you started winning world titles or before?
Oh, no, it was well before. Yeah. Well before, yeah. So, I wouldn't say I'm a superstitious athlete. I don't have to wear a particular pair of socks or a particular colour set of underpants on race day or whatever. But it was certainly a ritual. I had a little routine that I guess was part of the mental game of racing, just trying to reassure yourself and calm those doubts, those self-doubts that every athlete has.
Crowie, in terms of your origin story, I mean, it's obviously you've shared this a lot across your career, but before we went live, I mentioned that maybe the only thing I'll beat you in is beating you to the sport of triathlon. I grew up in the 90s, just idolising the domestic series on TV, the Brad Bevans, wanting to emulate that. And when I researched this, I saw your first triathlon, Crowie, was 1994, I believe, or it might have been around then, 22 years of age at Cornell. So what was your first recollection of the sport of triathlon?
Well, I'd known of the sport for a long time. I mean, I grew up, my main sport growing up was soccer. I played soccer from the age of about 5 and a half until I was nearly 20, until I was just before my 20th birthday. So I played team sports, and like a lot of kids growing up in Australia, I tried my hand at everything, but soccer was certainly my main sport. But I was always interested in endurance sports, and in particular multidiscipline sports. So, I mean, I used to love watching the Coolangatta Gold growing up on TV. I loved every year when that was on. I'd watch the Hawaiian Ironman every year on television. So, I certainly, and I like the multidiscipline events, the events where you had to sort of master more than one thing. So, when the Olympics were on, I used to love to watch the decathlon. Daley Thompson, the famous UK Olympic gold medalist in decathlon, he was one of my favourite athletes during the 80s. So I knew of the sport, and I'd follow the sport mainly just through the Hawaiian Ironman that I'd seen on the wide world of sports. So even in my soccer days, I wouldn't say I was an avid fan of the sport, but I was aware of it. And it wasn't unusual to see, races on television in Australia. Like you said, we had a nationally televised domestic series. And the one that everybody knows was the Tui's Blue. That was about the time that I started in the sport, 94. But even before then, you could flick on Sports World on a Saturday on Channel 7 and they'd recap. I think we had a Nike series, a Daihatsu series, and it also wasn't unusual to flick on the television once in a while and see a couple of the bigger races in the US, because I think, at the time we had two of Australia's all-time greatest athletes, not just triathletes, all-time greatest athletes in Greg Welsh and McKeely Jones. They were dominating a lot of races in the US. So, it wasn't unusual to see a race like St. Croix or Chicago or Alcatraz on television. So I was very aware of the sport even before I started in it. And
can you remember that first triathlon? Obviously, you've been based out of Cronulla, the Shire, from what I understand, more or less your whole life. That was one of the Cornell local races, was it?
It was, yeah. Well, I actually moved with my wife. We moved down here in 1998, but I'd been training down here for a year or two before that. I was from the inner west. I grew up in the inner western suburbs of Sydney, went to Asheville Boys High School, grew up in Croydon Park. But yeah, it was one of the Cornell triathlons. And when I stopped playing soccer, I was at university full time, studying to be a physiotherapist. And I had a job labouring for a builder, and I actually injured myself. I got a hernia, which I had to have surgically repaired, as they did back in those days. And I had a lot of time off, about 6 months off all sports. And I just started jogging to get back in shape. And one thing led to another, and I started taking the running more seriously, and then I started swimming. So I actually did a lot of aquathons, or biathlons as they used to call them. And there used to be plenty of them back in those days. They were run at pretty much every beach. So I'd do some on a Friday evening at Manly Beach. There was others in the eastern suburbs of Sydney around Watsons Bay, Bondi Beach, Bronte, some down in Cronulla. So I think I did about 12 months of the biathlons before I actually did my first triathlon out at Kurnell, and it just came about through an innocent discussion with one of my best mates at university. He was an A-grade cyclist, and he'd done a few triathlons for cross-training. He knew I was super interested because I was always peppering him with questions, and he'd seen me reading some of the magazines, and he said, I can help you get a bike. You should give the sport a crack. So we bought a bike out of the trading post on the Thursday, and I did my first race on the Sunday at Kurnell. And yeah, like a lot of people, who do the sport, you get hooked almost immediately. Well, I certainly was. I loved it. I was very raw. I just had BMX pedals. I think I had sort of cross-training shoes, but I loved it from the get-go, from the very first race. Even just turning up before the race, the whole atmosphere around it, all these fit people walking around, and just a great atmosphere and vibe around the event. So yeah, that was my first race, and it didn't take me long to jump into more after that.
And Crowie, as a soccer player, obviously you were staying fit, but at school, obviously your athletic abilities are enormous. Were you a competitive cross-country runner or decent in the pool, or you weren't even going near that stuff through high school?
No, I did go near it. It certainly wasn't my main thing, and soccer was everything. It was my main focus. I wanted to be a professional footballer when I got older, and I played at quite a decent level. So, a lot of our training, I remember at least one session a week was dedicated to fitness only. And, a soccer match goes for 90 minutes. So I think all that soccer, it certainly developed my aerobic conditioning. Even though I guess it's a little bit different, it's more agility and can be more explosive, you still actually are running for 90 minutes. So I think that helped. And, I think that fitness, I did see it at the athletics carnivals and at cross country. I made it through to state a couple of times, and it wasn't actually until I got to regional or state when I came up against the guys who actually did train that I would get beaten. I'd do pretty well at the school and zone and even the regional carnivals. So I think even then I had I could see that I had a natural ability for these sort of endurance events, although I will say with the athletics, I had more of a natural speed than I did endurance. I was better at sort of 400 and 800 than anything longer than that. I had an easy speed that came, and I was always one of the quicker players in my soccer teams. So I guess I had a nice gift of speed as a youngster, but there was no formal endurance training until I did start in triathlon. I did play water polo in high school. I played 3 or 4 years of water polo, which was fun. And along with my brother, we were in a swimming club through our sort of mid to late teens. So we used to swim once a week there. But I certainly hadn't exposed myself to squad training or proper endurance training until my early 20s when I started in the sport. So, yeah, it was sort of, I guess, jumping in at the deep end. But I did feel I had a natural affinity for the sport. And, obviously you don't know what your genetics hold for you until you actually train. You don't know if you're genetically predisposed to do well in those sorts of events. But I guess from the psychological standpoint, I'd always been attracted. As I said to you, I used to watch the Coolangatta Gold. I would actively go out and research when the Hawaiian Ironman was on to make sure I watched that. So I was always definitely interested in those sorts of events. And, I guess they say that you choose an event, but in some ways an event chooses you as well, depending on what you're predisposed to do well at. And I think the stars just aligned for me. I must have had good genetics for it, but I also had the desire and the passion to do well at it, and I was certainly very interested in it.
And Crow, interest is one thing. So many people are interested in sport and pursuits, but to be one of those people, those kids watching Dave Scott, Mark Allen battle it out on the lava fields in Hawaii on TV, Wide World of Sports, watching Greg Welsh win in 94, for Australia with that iconic, leap across the finish line. Interest is one thing, but then to the irony of you being that kid watching that, along with, thousands of others worldwide, to then be down the track, years later, a multiple Hawaii Ironman world champion. I just think someone has to be that. But could you ever have imagined that? And if you could, at what point was your belief galvanized within you that, you know what, this is my destiny and I'm going for it?
Yeah, I would be absolutely lying to you if I said that I knew that was going to happen when I first started. All I knew is that I dipped my big toe in with this sport. I loved it. I had a passion for it, to get better at it and just immerse myself in it. And I felt that I could improve and be very good at it. I did. From those first couple of races, it was obvious I had some natural talent. And I thought, wow, imagine if I actually train a little bit and just pursue this. And obviously being halfway through a physiotherapy degree, I had a basic understanding of the principles of endurance training. And I knew that, I had to be consistent and work on a few different things like strength and endurance and speed and all those things. But I would be lying if I said from that first year I knew I was going to go on to win what I won. All I knew is that I had a massive passion for it. It really ticked all the boxes for me and the challenges that it presented. And I enjoyed the training. I was always a very hard trainer. That was never an issue for me. So what I did feel was that, I was on a very steep learning curve and I was just going to ride it for as long as I could and see where it led me. To actually go on and win the races, like you mentioned, Hawaii is one of them. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible to think that I'd watched that race on television before I'd ever done the sport, probably for 5 or 10 years before I ever did the sport. And to actually get there, it's an incredible feeling. It was an incredible feeling just to get to Hawaii to race, to be honest. But to win it was just next level excitement, next level of everything, of all those emotions. So, I was very lucky. I think, to be good at anything, I guess it's the same. An endurance sport is like anything. You've got to have, I guess, equal measures of natural talent, work ethic, the right sort of people in your corner and the right sort of advice. And you need some luck as well. And I was in the right place at the right time. I had good people in my corner, like Greg Welsh, who became a mentor and was always an idol, and people of that ilk who, for some reason, took the time to help me out, for which I'll forever be grateful to them for that. All those things just sort of conspired to put me in the right place at the right time, and it was an amazing journey. I can't believe, I still to this day, even talking about it, to think that I ended up getting to Hawaii and winning there 3 times. It's incredible to think that.
Crowie, you mentioned, the likes of a Greg Welsh, who, as you mentioned, Greg, I actually recalled that I had a picture of Greg in his orange it wasn't a tri suit then, it was the DTs and the singlet, crossing the finish line on my maybe year 8 English book, and the teacher would be like, "Who's this?" I think I did a school assignment on Greg Welsh's 94 victory. But why do you think it was that the likes of Greg Welsh did want to give you that time and that input? Was it something about you?
I don't know. I think I was just very eager. I happened to be in the right place at the right time on a number of occasions. I remember really early in my career, Greg had just won in Hawaii, so I think it was early the next year. I think it was 95. He was shooting a television commercial for one of his sponsors, and they needed some athletes for the background. And ironically, 3 of the athletes ended up being myself, Greg Bennett, and Simon Whitfield.
Wow.
2 handy athletes in their own right. And, I just got to spend a lot of time with Greg on that shoot that day. Actually, it was shot over 2 days. And then later on, about 4 years after that, whilst I was still at uni, I think I may have just graduated. I got 4th in a World Cup race in Auckland, and it was the 2nd World Cup race I'd ever done. And on the back of that result, I got invited into the national team training camp that they were having down in Thredbo in December 96, January 97, and I got to spend more time with Greg again. And I think when you just spend time with someone, he could see I was eager to learn. He was just very gracious with me always, and I'd bother him with questions. I'm sure I was a massive pain, but he was always so gracious with his time. And, I hung on every word. I remember on that training camp down in Thredbo, it was, at the time, Brett Sutton was the national coach, and it was a lot of the greatest triathletes in the world at the time were there. Greg was there, and Ben Bright, Greg Bennett, Trent Chapman, Chris Hill, and for the ladies, Jackie Gallagher, Loretta Harrop, Nikki Hackett, Joanne King, all of them legends of our sport. And it was a very competitive training environment. I think Brett wanted to cultivate that, and I thrived. I love that sort of an environment. And often you get paired up with people to do sessions with, and Brett would always pair me up usually with Greg and Chapo for the run sessions. And obviously during the sessions there wasn't a lot of talking, but during the warm up and cool down we'd chat. And one thing I remember Greg said to me then was, as you're developing, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself into one style of racing or another. Branch out and try your hand at everything. And I took him on his word. I took his advice literally and entered my first half Ironman, which I did 2 months after that conversation, which was in March 97. So he always had a huge influence on my career. And I know you're obviously an avid triathlete and have been involved in the sport and a huge fan. Growing up and coming through the 90s, I think triathlon in Australia, we were blessed with having Greg, obviously Brad Bevan and Miles Stewart for the guys, and for the girls we had McKeely, Emma Carney and Jackie Gallagher. I think between those 6 athletes, they inspired a whole generation behind them. And we were very lucky to have them. They were winning races all over the world, and I think they inspired a whole generation of athletes to follow on. And so we're all, my generation or the next generation, we were so lucky to have them as role models, and they were the pioneers, really. And then even before them, there were a lot of great athletes. But I think the sport was just, as you mentioned before, it was starting to gain prominence with nationally televised events, and also some of the bigger races overseas, the Australians were winning, so it was getting mainstream media back here, races like Chicago and St. Croix, as I mentioned, and Alcatraz. So a lot of the younger athletes here, we were exposed to those races. We knew about them because there were Australians doing well and winning them. And I think we were all lucky. I mean, when I look at what the sport's become, and it's evolving all the time, we're in the Olympics, it's a lot of great things, triathlon. I think in this country, we owe a huge debt to those 6 athletes. In my mind, they'll always be on a pedestal for what they've done for us.
You're listening to Craig Crowie Alexander, 5 times world triathlon champ, 3 times Hawaii Ironman champion, and former Kona course record holder. Share the highs, the lows, and the learnings of his incredible career. Support for today's show comes from Normatec Recovery. Using its patented pulse technology to help athletes recover faster between workouts and after performance by reducing muscle soreness and improving circulation. Get fresh legs faster with Normatec. Listeners of the show can enjoy 5% off all Normatec products by jumping over to alphasport.com.au and entering the promo code capital POGO, POGO. Normatec is the leader in rapid recovery systems designed to give a competitive edge to the world's elite endurance athletes. The Normatec Pulse recovery systems are dynamic compression devices designed for recovery and rehabilitation. Support for today's show is, as always, lovingly brought to you by Pogo Physio. We exist to help you get back to your physical best following injury. We want everyone who walks through the doors of Pogo Physio to cross their physio finish line. That's where we high-five you and tell you that you've finished rehabilitation and celebrate the fact that you're back to your physical best. In addition to traditional session-to-session physiotherapy appointments, we also offer our clients some of the industry's most unique models of care, including our 2, 6, and 12-week fixed fee, unlimited access finish line programs. These include unlimited access to hands-on therapies, exercise rehabilitation, including clinical Pilates, and use of state-of-the-art equipment such as the AlterG anti-gravity treadmill. In addition to the popular finish line programs are the ever-popular fixed fee wellness booster monthly packages. These include remedial massage, physiotherapy, clinical Pilates, and access to state-of-the-art equipment, all starting from a very low $195 per month. To find out more about Pogo Physio and its services, jump over to pogophysio.com.au. But now let's jump back to Craig Alexander. Crowie, the bit that I find in your story in particular just so inspiring, and I guess it reflects the emerging belief that you were riding. As you say, you dipped your toe into the sport, you loved it, you threw yourself into a high performance environment, you were experiencing some heightened success on the way, still no major, what I guess you'd call breakthroughs. You've got Nerida, your wife, she's working as an emergency nurse. You had finished your physiotherapy degree, I believe, and then, you followed the pursuit, working part-time jobs, labourers, milk depots, all those things, sleeping in bike bags to get to races in the US. Those early pioneering days where you're chasing the dream. Was there a point though through that chase, that pursuit, where I know I've asked, but that belief started to really kick in? What was the first time you went, all right, I'm establishing myself here? Was it the 2006 inaugural World 70.3 Champs win, or was it the Lifetime Fitness race?
Oh, they were all pivotal. I was well before. I think for me, it was just little incremental things, and I could see that I was improving all the time. I mentioned that first half Ironman I did in 97. It was the New South Wales Championships. I won that race. So, that gives you a little bit of confidence. Obviously, it's not a world championship, but you think, you could see the improvement. I could see the improvement in myself. I guess at the time, the thing was, coming into the sport in your early 20s, a lot of the other athletes around my age had come through the junior ranks and had even pursued elite careers, I guess you could say, for want of a better word, in the individual disciplines. Some had come in as great swimmers, a lot as great runners and elite level, national level runners as juniors. So I felt like I had a lot of catching up to do. But what was heartening for me was I could see improvement all the time. So I guess the confidence was building that way. But you still, I guess you're impatient. The way an endurance sport works, though, is you just have to build that base over time. It just comes with consistent work over time. So there was certainly a lot of times when I was disheartened, for sure. But, a conversation here with McKeely or with Welshie there, and just some words of advice. There were many, many examples, I think, of times when I was super frustrated. I remember Greg inviting me to his house for lunch one day. I think it was in 99, and in 99 I didn't travel. A lot of the guys who were trying to qualify for the Olympics or who were full-time, particularly if they were on the ITU World Cup circuit, they would do 7 or 8 World Cup races a year, and that series went all around the world. Neri and I got married in early 99, and I didn't want to travel. Obviously in a new marriage, I didn't want to leave for 5 or 6 months. So I raced through our national series and right up to Mooloolaba, which is the traditional end of the Australian season. And then I took a couple of months off, and I did stay home. I used the physio degree. I got a job in the city for National Mutual in their health management department. I was helping conduct exercise stress tests on overworked corporates and executives for a couple of days a week, and 2 or 3 days a week I was labouring for a builder as well, so I stayed home. That gives you perspective as well. Then you see what life could be if you didn't pursue the triathlon. So, and it wasn't like that I needed that sort of a sliding doors moment. I always wanted to pursue the sport of triathlon from the minute I got into it. But you've got to be realistic too, and if the very nature of being a professional means it's got to be financially viable. And, when you're in your mid-20s, I had a physio degree just hovering in the background there. And so I always had that question lingering in the back of my mind, should I not be using that? Is that not the done thing? If you go to uni, should you not be using the degree? So I just think that there's all those forces at play, and you need to find a balance. But ultimately, you need to do what you love to do and what you want to do. And I certainly had no shortage of positive reinforcement coming from the sport. In 98, when I went to France, I won the French long course championships. So the second half Ironman I won their national championships. And then later that year, I did another big half Ironman over in France, where I finished second to a guy, Rene Rovira, his name was. He went on to get 5th in Kona that year. So I was seeing improvement, and I was getting some really good positive reinforcement like that, winning some races like the Cairns Half Ironman, which was a pretty big race, and I won the Nemea ITU points race. So I certainly was getting my name up there in certain events. But, you know, at the time in Australia too, you've got to remember we had a golden era there with Greg, Brad and Miles, and then throw into the mix a whole bunch of guys and girls coming through the ranks who went on to be some of the best triathletes we've ever seen. You know, certainly the guys I had to race, you'd have Greg Bennett, Craig Walton, Chris McCormack, Trent Chapman, Courtney Atkinson, Peter Robertson, you know, in addition to the big three. Chris Hill, they were all guys who were not just forming the second echelon, they were then the top echelon, and they were the best in the world. So it was just a matter of being patient. But, mate, I think any journey has its peaks and troughs. And to answer your question, there were a lot of times there where you were frustrated. Well, I was certainly frustrated that, you know, things mightn't have been going or progressing as quickly as I would have liked. But I always took confidence from the fact I was progressing the whole time. And, you know, there were some key moments, just conversations with different people. Like I said, that lunch I had with Greg in '99, he pulled me aside and said, you know, someone with your ability can really go on and do great things. So those conversations I would always think of in the harder times, you know, that would, when you needed just that shot in the arm or that dose of inspiration, I would think of certain races that I'd won or conversations I'd had with different people, and it would spur me on just to, you know, to roll the sleeves up and get back to it.
And I guess hanging on to a word like that from, you know, a Greg Welsh, that, you know, you've got great things in front of you, helps to offset some of those internal anxieties, if you'd call them that, or indecisiveness, not so much indecisiveness, but pressures, I guess, around, you know, society's expectations about doing the done thing, using your degree versus not using it. I know I've heard Nerida say that, you know, both your parents and Nerida's, you know, were sort of like, when's, probably in jest, but when's Craig going to get a real job? How did, you know, if you had comments like that come in your way, how did that make you feel? Was that just more fuel in your engine jets, or was that sometimes, you know, a bit frustrating and tricky?
Oh, I wouldn't say it was motivating, but it was certainly. I mean, I remember at our wedding, Neri's dad, in his speech, he talked about triathlon and how, I guess it was a niche sport, and how was I going to keep his daughter to the style to which she'd become accustomed. You know, that was the theme of his speech, which was very funny, and a lot of it was in jest, but there is truth in joking, and I think it made me realise that I had to maximise my time in the sport. And, you know, I was always very serious like that when I'd finished the degree and it was now time to really devote myself to the sport. Neri would go off to work a shift and I'd just go off and train all day. I was very serious about it. I didn't just lay around. I got up, I had a schedule. And then later on, even heading to the US for the first time in 2002, starting to get sponsors. I think I was very professional about the way I went about trying to attract sponsors and keeping the sponsors. And that's another layer on top of just performance, right? The whole business side of the sport. So then that opens up to you. And, but yeah, those pressures are there. And I think, you know, when you think of every young kid growing up who wants to be a professional athlete, only a very lucky few get to, I guess, be successful. So, you know, you are aware of, I guess, the success rate. It's not great, but, you know, ultimately I just removed all those things from my mind and thought, well, all I can really do are the things that are going to make me a better athlete, and, you know, I'd be well served just to concentrate on those things, and that's what I did. But it was hard. It certainly was hard, and, you know, I guess a funny story talking about our parents and whatnot. I mean, I had been winning races and getting a lot of podiums. I was very lucky. I was a very consistent athlete, and, you know, every year from that first year when Welsh told me I should do a half Ironman, from 97 onwards, I always put a lot of different kinds of races into my schedule. There were always half Ironmans in the schedule, a lot of non-drafting races and draft legal races. I mixed it up, and I was just lucky. I was consistent, and I think you need to be consistently in the top 10, consistently in the top 8, then the top 5. Before you win, you need to. I think that's usually the progression in an endurance sport. If you watch athletes coming up through the ranks, they their name pops up in the top 10 and the top 5, and then it keeps popping up on the podium. And then, I understood that was the progression, and that's the path I was on. So, and in a sport like triathlon, you can win a race and get $10,000, and it can be one of the biggest races in the world. So it's not like the PGA Golf Tour where you're winning millions and millions of dollars at a time. And I think the very nature of that, as an emerging professional triathlete, you have to race a lot because a lot of your income comes from prize money, particularly in the early days. And that leads to, I guess, a necessity to race a lot. But I think that's part of the development in our sport too. That, for me, that certainly helped racing a lot. And, I will say, I remember going to the US for the first time and getting some sponsors, and I started getting on the podium in 2002 straight away at some of the bigger races. 2002 in LA, I finished second behind the great Craig Walton in probably still to this day one of the best fields I've ever raced in when you look at some of the names on that start list. And, fast forward a couple of years from that, I won the race in LA and Chicago. In fact, in 2004, I won Chicago the last weekend in August, which was a non-drafting race. And at the time, it was the biggest individual participation race in the world. And that was about $10,000 to win. Then the following weekend, I won the US Pro Champs, which was an ITU draft legal race. That was in Boston. And the week after that, I went back to non-drafting, won the LA Triathlon. So a few of those race directors, Dave McGilvray and Jack Caress, dubbed that as the Triple Crown. Even winning those 3 races, you'd only pocket $20,000. So, when you'd been based in the US for 4 or 5 months, it's quite expensive to do. I wouldn't say you're breaking even. I was doing much better than breaking even, but it's not like you're raking in the big cash. So, yeah, there was that pressure there that I felt that as a young married couple, I had to, provide for my wife, even though she was working full time. But you do feel those pressures, I think. And certainly winning the big money race in 2005, the Lifetime Fitness, I remember speaking to Neri, and, it was a great time in our lives because we just become parents. Lucy was 8 weeks old.
Wow.
And as any parent will tell you, you're just walking on clouds those first, in between lack of sleep. It was such a great time in our lives. And I remember Neri couldn't come to that race, obviously, because of Lucy, and I remember ringing her, and she was actually watching the race back in Boulder with Loretta Harrop, who'd won the year before but couldn't race in 2005 because she had an injury. And, the first thing I said to her was, you've got to call your mum and dad. And she said, it's midnight at home. I said, I don't care. I want your dad to know. Only because of his wedding speech, saying, how are you going to look after my daughter? So you need to ring them and wake them up and tell them that finally I've come through for them.
And what was the first thing that Nerida's father said to you after that $160,000 US cash day for the Lifetime Fitness race?
He said, this triathlon thing's not bad.
Oh, that's brilliant. Crowie, a couple of just general questions, and then I just want to throw to a little bit on Hawaii. Where do you think your athletic talent comes from? Genetics, the bloodline, siblings?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think so. My dad apparently was a pretty decent middle distance runner. And he was also he was into a lot of sports though. I think the genetics, but I think just it's a combination of things in an endurance sport. I think you need the mentality for it as well. And you got to be prepared for the hard grind of the training, particularly in those longer events. It's, they're just such long, grueling events that it requires a long, grueling build-up. And so I think you need to have the physical durability and I guess the physical talent to get through the build-up, but also you need the mental willingness to adapt the grind of it. And I think it's a combination of all those things. But certainly I know, having raced all the distances, having come through and done the Formula One series and later the Accenture series as it became known, into half Ironmans and Olympic distance and Ironman. All the races are tough for different reasons. They present different challenges, I think. And that's why they were attractive to me. I love the challenge that they all presented. Some were more technical in terms of the skills you required, like those shorter Formula One style races, the criterium style. You needed great bike handling skills and great technical skills within the sport. Others were more just a long grind, which required a certain kind of physical training, but also a mental approach. So I think all the distances present a really specific challenge. And depending on the kind of person you are, for me, I liked all of it. I didn't really like one style of triathlon more than the other. I liked all of them because of the way they just challenged you. But I think it's a mixture of all those ingredients. It doesn't hurt to have some good genetics. I think it certainly helps to embrace the grind and the workload. You've got to have an appetite for work for sure, and you've got to really love it and embrace it. And I think you've got to have a certain mindset to get through those long training months, and also in the races themselves, there's always challenges and things that pop up that you need to be able to deal with and think on your feet, and the tactics that are in play as well. So I think you need equal measures of all of those things that you mentioned.
Craig, you've always struck me as an incredibly articulate and intelligent athlete, and intelligence extends beyond the world of academics. But what do you think? Do you feel like your physiotherapy degree has helped your sporting performances over the years? If so, how?
Oh, absolutely, no question. My wife often jokes that I got the degree and had to pay for the degree. Obviously, I never used it, but I think I've used it every day of my sporting life. In the early days, it was just the principles of endurance training that we learn in subjects like physiology, and so I was really leaning heavily on that knowledge to write my own training programs, as well as getting sessions out of triathlon magazines and conversations with other athletes and trying to train with a lot of other great athletes. But there's no question too in understanding how the body works, and particularly as you would see, in an endurance event that requires repetitive motion, just the efficiency of movement that leads to great performance and good functional movement. And that's your bread and butter as a physio, learning how the body works properly and the things that you can do that will help performance and efficiency, and also sort of combat injuries. So the injury prevention side of things as well. So there's no question that knowledge that I got, I used a lot. It wasn't wasted. It helped me every day of my sporting career.
Crowie, this show's about the highs, the lows, and the learnings of physical performance, the pursuit of it. The highs, as per your bio, 5 times world champ, 70.3 champ, 2006, then again 5 years later in Las Vegas, 70.3 champ. The same year you also took out one of your Hawaii Ironman titles, 3 times Hawaii Ironman champ, 2007, finished second, runner-up in your debut there, which is just remarkable. 2010, obviously, you had a great prep. You ran a 2:41 marathon off the bike. You finished 4th. And then you came back in 2011 with a bit of a tumultuous lead-in. I don't want to be so presumptuous to declare that as maybe your highlight in terms of your overall performance. That was the year you set the Hawaii Ironman course record. But in asking you, what is Craig Crowie Alexander's, if you had to boil it down to one performance that really is significant to you? It's a hard question, I know. What one would that be and why?
It is a hard question. They all mean something different. I would say one of the most satisfying performances, if not probably it's got to be in my top 3, was winning the race, the Lifetime Fitness Triathlon in Minnesota in 2005. I think at that stage in our lives, being parents, new parents, and just what it meant to win that race. At the time, it was the highest prize purse in the history of our sport, but it was so much more than that. It was so much more than that. It was a race that had been put on by Lifetime Fitness, an invitation-only race. You had to submit your resume to get in, and really you had to be an Olympic medalist, an Olympian, a world champion, a national champion to get in. They only invited 20 males, 20 females, and it was an interesting format. It was an Olympic distance non-drafting race, but they also had this equaliser format where they would look at all the non-drafting races from the previous 12 months for the guys and the girls, and they had some formula, they called it the equaliser, where they worked out a predetermined head start. So they would give the girls a head start. So they'd fire the gun and the girls would go off, and then we'd stand on the beach. This big electronic clock would count down. And the head start, the handicap was usually somewhere between 8 or 10 minutes. And yeah, so not only did you have to beat athletes, and it was a cast of thousands who was there, but athletes like Craig Walton, Greg Bennett, Simon Lessing, Simon Whitfield, Hamish Carter, Peter Robertson, Bevan Doherty. It was a who's who of Olympic distance racing. So you had to win the men's side of it, but then you had to catch the girls as well. And it was a nationally televised race in the US on NBC, one of the first races they ever televised live. And in 2005, I was the first guy to win. The girls had got the chocolates for the first few years. Barb Lindquist, the great US triathlete, won in 2002 and 2003. And Loretta Harrop, as I mentioned earlier, she won in 2004. So I was the first guy to catch the girls and win in 2005. And I think it was a combination of a lot of things. I think I had some success on the US circuit. It was my third or fourth year racing there. But, in 2002, I made a decision to go to the US for the first time. I had wanted to go to the Commonwealth Games in Manchester. And I was on the train-on squad. I think there was 8 athletes on the train-on squad for the men and 8 for the women. And from that 8, they were going to pick the final team of 3. But I came down, I contracted the chickenpox in early 2002 before the 2 selection races, which meant I missed the selection races and ultimately the Commonwealth Games and World Championships and a lot of things. And, it was a long layoff. It was a long layoff getting that sort of a virus as an adult. And when I finally got back to racing and training, really mid 2002, I made a decision to go to the US, and it was probably inevitable, that I would do that because, as we were mentioning right off the top when we were discussing, if you look now, moving into Tokyo 220, I think triathlon's going for its 6th inclusion. That's the 6th Olympic cycle we've had as a sport in the Olympic Games. And, if you're a younger athlete in your mid-20s now, you've grown up with triathlon in the Olympics. But, as I said to you, the sports that I watched growing up, particularly the endurance sports, were the gold and the Hawaiian Ironman. So, and then the events that later on that sort of I came to watch and follow were those races in the US, like Alcatraz and Chicago and St. Croix. So I think it was always inevitable that I would get to the US. But going there, you give up on one style of racing to pursue another, and it was that lifetime race was the one race every year where I think everybody came together. So it was a very validating win, if that makes sense. Just professionally very satisfying. I didn't get much of an opportunity to race a lot of the guys that I'd raced early on in my career when I first started, and we used to race each other regularly in the national series and other races. And a lot of guys like Simon Whitfield and Hamish Carter, Bev Doherty, they were predominantly on the ITU circuit. So, obviously being in the US, I got to race Craig Walton and Greg Bennett, Conrad Stoltz, a lot of those guys very regularly. But just that lifetime race was the one race where we all sort of came together, and it was just a very satisfying win. And just a very satisfying time in life. I think that when I think back, a lot of the emotions that are tied up in that time are because, Lucy was 8 weeks old and we were traveling as a young family. And I think that certainly ties into why I have such good recollections and memories of that time. But for me, that was a big breakthrough, I think, professionally. And you can't ignore the money. It was $160,000 in a car, which I think, in a niche sport like triathlon, to win a prize purse like that, it does change things. It takes a lot of pressure off. Not that I ever was motivated by money, but as a professional athlete, by definition, you're trying to make money. You're trying to survive. Your career has to be financially viable. So, for a lot of reasons, for me, that's one that I always think back fondly on. But trying to pick what's your favourite race, it's like trying to pick between your children.
Yeah.
On different days, you're going to pick a different one. So.
Hello to kids listening in. And look, I know, Crowie, that's an impossible question. And look, from the highs to the lows, describe the darkest day before we throw into a performance round, some of the learnings from your career. But Describe the darkest day in Crowie's athletic career to date.
I think there's a lot. Once again, I couldn't pick a single day, but I remember desperately, after watching the Sydney Olympics, and I remember clearly that day, Neri and I went in with a good friend of mine who probably should have been racing that day but missed the team, Chris Hill. And we went and watched a lot of our friends compete in the Olympic Games, and we saw one of our friends, Simon Whitfield, pull off one of the most remarkable victories I've ever seen. And still to this day, I think I get more goosebumps thinking about watching Simon that day than thinking back to any of my own races. And, you know, after seeing that day and experiencing that, thinking, you know, I wouldn't mind being part of that, and then trying to make the Commonwealth Games and getting sick, getting the chicken pox, that was disheartening. You know, I think for every victory that you have on your resume, there's probably 10 or 20 soul-destroying defeats that nobody knows about. But it's part of your journey, and, you know, it's easy to be philosophical now. You look back in hindsight, but there are teachings in all of those races, win or lose. And I think if you pay enough attention and you're eager to learn, you know, it's a cliche to say you learn as much or more from the defeats, but I think you do. I think the real challenge comes from just being resilient enough to dust yourself off and shake off a loss and move forward. But I'm not going to lie and say that a lot of the defeats don't hurt, especially, you know, races where you had designs on getting on the podium or winning and maybe coming up a little short for whatever reason. They mark you, they scar you, those races, but you do have to dust yourself off and come back. And, you know, I think I can say this with the experience of someone who's now 44, looking back over 23 or 24 years racing as a professional, that, you know, all those moments are important. The dark moments are just as important as the wins, because I think it what galvanizes you, and it's what makes you enjoy the wins when they come along as well. And, you know, while you celebrate them with your team, your family, your crew, your little support crew, all the people who've contributed, coaches, training partners, sponsors, and, you know, they all become a part of your journey, and they celebrate the wins with you, and they commiserate the losses. And the losses do hurt, but I think as you get older, you get, I think, more of a insight into what's important in life and a good perspective. And, you know, it all forms part of your journey. I think a lot of the times as an athlete, you get that durability and that mental resilience because of those harder times, the times when you're sick, or when you make a mistake in a race, or you get beaten. And there's a lot of, I mean, some of the dark moments are when you're in great form, but you just get well beaten, and there are no excuses. And you think, wow, what happened there? I just got towed up. And, you know, that was the best that I had to offer. And that can be confronting. I mean, it's one thing to lose when your preparation's been compromised, or, you know, things have happened. You've had little illnesses or injuries that come into it and upset your preparation, your consistency. But when things go well and you get belted, that can be confronting. So, but I think it forms part of your jigsaw and your psyche moving forward, and they're all important parts of your journey. And I know it's a cliche to say it, but in hindsight, looking back, as you get older, I think you get more perspective on what it was that made you successful, and the things that really contributed, and all those things do contribute.
You're listening to Craig Crowie Alexander, 5 times world triathlon champ, 3 times Hawaii Ironman champion, and former Hawaii Ironman course record holder. Share around his career, the highs, the lows, and the learn-ins. If you missed last week's episode featuring 3 times Australian Olympic marathoner Lee Troopy Troop, then be sure to jump over and take a listen. Here's a little snippet of what you missed.
You know, in Boulder, you have like just professional athletes in their own groups, or you have recreational runners in their groups, and the two never mixed, which anywhere around the world, like it does, like you see the club systems in Australia and the club systems in UK and the club systems in New Zealand. So, you know, it's been awesome to see how many people have been able to embrace it. And, you know, unfortunately, the club is going through a bit of a tough time at the moment. One of my good athletes took his life on Saturday night, and, you know, we have a memorial for him. It's just amazing to have a community within a community. Obviously, it means a lot to me.
To tune in to the full episode and explore the archives of the Physical Performance Show, be sure to jump over to pogophysio.com.au, explore the show notes, or simply peruse the archives from your preferred podcast player, be that iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or any of the platforms that host the Physical Performance Show. Now let's jump back to Craig Alexander. Crowie, you mentioned before we throw into the performance round, longevity, maturing, the ability to then have greater perspective as a result of time on the clock. I am fascinated. I'm 37 and I still enjoy trying to discover my best no matter what season of life I'm in. We've had previous guests on the show, Bernard Lagat as an example from the US, 5 times US Olympian, who's still, out there running. You probably saw the same thing I did, Craig. He was part of that sub 2 hour, marathon attempt with Kipchoge, and he's at 42, running a, whatever it was, 5K split there with Kipchoge around that racetrack in Monza. What do you believe would be, if you had to boil it down to the top 3 characteristics that give an athlete longevity, what would they be?
First of all, let me say 37, you are a spring chicken.
Oh, come on, that's awesome.
This decade's ahead of you.
Awesome. I'll take that. That's one of those words like you had from Greg Welsh.
The top 3 characteristics, I think you've got to have a passion and a love for it, because that's what leads to that internal drive or that motivation to keep getting up and working. And that's what it takes in an endurance sport. You just got to keep. It's not about the epic sessions. It's just an accumulation of all the sessions over time. And, weathering the storms of motivation and injury and all those things. So I think you've got to have a passion and a love for it, and that intrinsic drive. That's the first thing that helps. Having genetics, I guess, helps to perform at the top level, but I think just to get the most out of yourself, having good advice and a good structure and routine to follow, a good consistent training routine helps. And I think a mental toughness or a resiliency, I think you need to be able to understand there's going to be some good times and some hard times, and you just got to keep bouncing back. And let me add into that, I think a physical durability helps as well, and having great biomechanics I know has certainly helped me, but every athlete knows it, particularly every endurance athlete, there's strength and conditioning, and there's things you can do to actually help your physical durability. So I'd say that's just as important. So yeah, you need that durability mentally and physically, an internal drive and a motivation, and just some good people around you. I think they're all good ingredients.
So they are a great top 3, Crowie, and I know that there's more. As you say, it's a jigsaw. Crowie, I've just got to throw in here before the performance round. You mentioned biomechanics, your running form, your running technique. I mean, when I popped up that the show was going to feature you as a guest, multiple people said Crowie's my running idol, my running form hero. It's I'm a great lover of smooth movers when it comes to running. What are your top running technique tips for listeners tuning in?
Yeah, I think running's one of those things. It's like a lot of things. There's certainly a lot of foundational principle things you can work on, but ultimately, I don't think you want to try and overcoach something. So long as you got the fundamentals correct, there's no right or wrong answer. It's really what's right for each individual, with their body type and leg length and things like that. So I think you always want to focus on your core strength and stability, and also your cadence, your turnover. I think there are a couple of things, well, certainly 2 things that are in the forefront of my mind when I run: my cadence, my leg turnover, and also just working on my core strength and stability, and a couple of little mental cues about holding that together under fatigue. So, you can look at a lot of great runners, whether they be on the track, marathon runners, in triathlon, and they're not all identical, but they have a lot of similar characteristics, and usually it's great leg turnover and really efficient technique, great core strength and stability.
Crowie, performance round. This can be your session for the day on top of your Swift session this morning, your lap of London. Training session you most dislike?
That's a tough one. I like them all. One I most dislike, I think when you're tired, particularly when you're in Ironman training, what's particularly hard is swim training. So I guess if I was to be totally honest, I never enjoyed driving to the pool. When I was under heavy fatigue from Ironman training, especially a lot of running, because your legs are just like lead. They don't add to your propulsion at all. They're just like having concrete anchors.
Training session you most love?
I love riding and running up in the mountains of Colorado.
Beautiful. Favourite pre-race meal before those historic Hawaii victories? What did you have?
Oh, it's just usually a little pasta that my wife knocked up. It'd usually have some sort of protein in it as well, maybe chicken or prawns or something like that. But yeah, just some sort of pasta and protein mix.
Nerys.
And some chocolate on top of that too, mate, as dessert, a little sweetener.
I did see a photo in your Instagram gallery of yourself and Emma Snowsill, a little while ago with this big, gigantic Cadbury block of chocolate. So that's always been part of the fuel by the looks.
Mate, I've always been partial. I've got a bit of a sweet tooth. I've always been partial to chocolate. I love it.
That's one of the joys of being an athlete, I think. Bedtime, morning time, has that always been quite structured for you?
When I was training for Ironman, yes. And obviously gets less structured when you become a parent. But yeah, no, I tried to be pretty disciplined with my routine, and there's a lot of great recovery protocols out there, but for me, the best one is always just good sleeping patterns. I think that's the best recovery you can have. So I always tried to make sure I was getting as much sleep as I could.
Who's the athlete? This is a bit like choosing your favourite child, I get it, but who's the athlete you most admire and why?
That is tough. Look, off the bat, I'll say, as I mentioned earlier, Greg, Brad and Miles for me will always be on a pedestal, and that will never change. I think when you're young, athletes you look up to and you idolise, they always hold a special place in terms of your career and how they've impacted it. Someone I respected a lot was Andreas Rayler. I just think he was a real gentleman on the race course. Quick little story, in 2009, coming through the special needs in Hawaii, in the Ironman World Champs. So I was in the lead. I was on the front of the group I was with. I wasn't in the lead. There were 2 or 3 guys off the front, but I was leading the front group, which for me, that was always my strategy. I'd like to get to the front of the group going through special needs to make sure I would get it. And I was number 1 that year. So the protocol is you call out your number and they go and get your special needs bag. The volunteer accidentally grabbed number 11 instead of number 1. So I couldn't grab it because it wasn't my bag. And about 200 metres later, Andreas Rayler, who was racing in Kona for the first time, came pedalling up with my special needs bag in his mouth. So obviously the volunteer had run back to the table and grabbed number 1, but I'd already gone past. And then as Andreas came past, he saw it and he saw I missed it. So not only to have the presence of mind to notice all that in the middle of a race, but to have the integrity and to grab somebody else's bag, and that's what he did. And so I always we formed a friendship after that. I always respected him just in the midst of a world championship like that to do that. I thought was very gracious. He's a guy I always respected.
Oh, thanks for sharing. That's a great story. Toughest competitor you've ever raced, Crowie? Who's that and why?
Where do I start? Craig Walton, Lessing, Bennett, Miles Stewart, McCormack, everyone.
Got it.
Yeah.
You've taken them all on.
Well, you get the picture.
Yeah.
There was a lot of great athletes.
Yeah. Any mantra, Crowie, that you consistently, I know it can change, but consistently have going through your head when you were racing?
But in the Ironman races, I would always just come back to, what can I do right now to improve my situation? I would always ask myself that question multiple times throughout the course of the day.
I like that. One word to describe your racing style, what would that be?
I don't know. Maybe I should ask you that question. I don't know. Consistent.
How would you describe being in the zone?
It's hard to describe, but when you've been there, you recognise it afterwards. Usually time moves slowly and quickly all at the same time. Things are happening on autopilot, particularly if your training practices have been good. Your fueling, your pacing all sort of happens on autopilot. And I remember, call it in the zone, whatever you want to call it, but a lot of those races, particularly the long distance races, when you're in a good headspace, you're actually paying attention to all the things you need to be, like your fueling, your pacing, your opposition, but you're not clock watching, and an hour or 2 can pass very quickly without even realising it. And you seem to be on autopilot and your subconscious is taking over.
When was the last time you were in that zone, Craig?
I can't even remember. Probably in one of the Kona wins, I would say. Maybe 2011. I'm sure I've been in it since, but I don't analyse the races the way I used to. So, and especially my own races, I used to have an agonising process of, well, it wasn't agonising for me, I enjoyed it, but I think it was agonising for everyone around me, where I would painstakingly go through every little detail of the build-up and then the race itself. I think as you move through your career, and no doubt I'm in the latter part of my career now, and I've got a lot of other things going on, I certainly don't undertake that re-evaluation or that race evaluation like I used to.
What's your best recovery tip?
Getting a lot of sleep, good sleep.
Yeah, you mentioned that. And your worst injury to date?
I've been lucky. I more had illnesses than injuries. As I mentioned, I had chickenpox in 2002, January 2002, which was shocking. To get it as an adult, it was very difficult to shake off. And then I got another liver virus at the end of 2005, cytomegalovirus, CMV, which knocked me around a little bit. In terms of musculoskeletal injuries, in 2001, I did a half Ironman up in Cairns, which I won. And after the race, I was stretching my calves over a gutter and I slipped off and tore my soleus. And that plagued me for the rest of the year, or for the next 2 or 3 months. But yeah, I've been lucky. I guess I worked hard in the gym to try and maximise my biomechanics, but I think I had more illnesses than injuries.
Crowie, the last question in the performance round, the hardest session you've ever done, is there one that stands out in your recollections?
Oh, there's a lot of stupid ones we used to do. I remember we used to, in the Sutherland Shire, if it was somebody's birthday, we'd do 100 hundreds in the pool, just things like that. But I used to do a lot of these brick sessions that probably were over the top in terms of their duration and their intensity, but they gave me a lot of mental confidence once I recovered from them. But I would do, up in Colorado up at altitude, I used to like to ride 5.5 or 6.5 hours with a lot of work at half Ironman sort of threshold pace, and then I'd jump off and run. And so one staple session was like a 170k ride, and it had a 40k tempo climb up a mountain, and then a 40k time trial at the end of it, and then I'd jump off and do minimum of 10, but the most I've ever did was 16 1-mile repeats, which is probably a little over the top at 6,000 or 7,000 feet elevation. But
wow, you remember that?
Yeah.
Crowie, on the learnings, finally here, if you could boil, this is very tough and I get it, but if you could boil all the learnings from your career, the highs, the lows, the whole lot, into one piece of advice just to extrapolate across people listening in, pursuing all sorts of physical performances, what would Craig Alexander's one piece of advice be?
Can I make it 2?
Go for it.
Surround yourself with good people and get great advice. That's the first thing. And the second thing is just be resilient. Embrace the journey and the pathway. And it is a cliche, but I think it's important to understand that there's going to be some harder times, but ultimately they might be the most fulfilling, just to be able to weather the storm and get through. Sometimes you just need to batten down the hatches. And I think as an older athlete, you understand. But I think when you're first coming in and trying to break through, you can be a little impatient and you can want success immediately. And I think you just got to be patient and understand that you're gonna be tested, but embrace that and be resilient.
Crowie, to give a little insight into the personality behind the guest, it's a fun question. 3 people, living or past, at your dinner table, who would you have? Bit of a fun one.
Nelson Mandela would be one. Roger Federer. And Nerida Alexander.
Of course, mate. And of course, your children would be there as part of that third person as well.
Brownie points.
You're beautiful kids. Mate, there's so much we could cover. Life for Craig Alexander going forwards, what's on the bucket list? Obviously, there's Sans Ego. Your great coaching platform, which is terrific. And listeners, we'll tag that up in the show notes, and I suggest you get over there and check it out. There's some great resources there. But what's on Crowie's bucket list going forwards?
Just to really be engaged with my kids and enjoy them. Our eldest is now in year 8 in high school, and it's gone quickly. Our youngest just started school this year, so I want to be around and get involved in as much of their lives as possible. I think obviously any parent would say that. I think it's important. And I think it's, for me personally as a professional athlete, I think it's important to be able to have that focus on others rather than yourself. I mean, almost by definition, as a professional athlete, it can be a very selfish endeavour because you're always thinking about yourself. Have I slept well? Have I eaten right? Is my training? There's a lot of self-examination that goes on. So I think it's just good to balance that now at this point in my life. So moving forward, I want to get really immersed in the kids' stuff. I want to do a lot of the things that I used to love doing growing up that you don't do as much as a professional athlete, like surfing, mountain biking, paddling a ski. Particularly early in my career, I used to do a lot of those things. And then with all the travel and the harder training, they took a back seat. And yeah, just be involved with a lot of them. You know, I'm very fortunate to be involved with a few different charities. I'm an ambassador for the Kids Foundation, which is coming up on about 12 years now. They do incredible work, raising awareness and money for children with life-changing injuries. They have a lot of education programs that they implement and roll out. And more recently with a charity called Make Bullying History. As a parent now, I've read and I understand the statistics and the impact of bullying, particularly on young lives, certainly in this country, but I'm sure it's a global phenomenon. So, I was invited by a guy called Brett Murray who started Make Bullying. He does touching a lot of young lives. He's got a lot of education programs that he rolls out in the younger children in high school. Very impactful and beneficial programs. So I try and work in with him when I can. You've got a couple of other little projects on the go as well, as you mentioned, Sanzigo and a few other things. And still very lucky to have a core group of loyal. A lot of them I've had for over 10 years, and so I want to give as much time as I can to them. They've been a huge part of my career, and being a professional athlete obviously is about performance. That's your primary objective, is to perform well, but there's a business side of sport that opens up after that. And when you partner with a lot of these companies, you're a spokesperson and an ambassador for them, and they've been a huge support to me over a long period of time, and I want to repay in kind now. So get out and about and promote them as best I can. So yeah, there's plenty on, and life is good at the moment.
Crowie, this, specifically, can you name some of those sponsors? Because one of the observations I've made of your career to date is you're the consummate professional. Your career is void of scandals. You speak well. You know how to give back to those sponsors. So who have been the main ones that you'd like to just give a shout out to?
A lot, but I'm with Argon for bikes, Argon 18. I've been with Oakley for 15 years. I've been with Shimano for 15 years. I'm currently with a company called Hotshot. It's a great product that was developed by a Nobel Prize winning scientist who's an avid endurance athlete. I really believe in that product. TYR, 2XU, Newton Running. I've been with Newton Running shoes well over a decade. I think they started in 06, 07. I became a sponsored athlete in 07, and really have a lot of time for that company. I love the ethos of the company and the things they do. Road ID, Compressed Sports. I've had a lot of great supporters. So I don't want to turn this into an advertisement, but if people are interested, they can see who they are. And I've been lucky. I think when you're at the pointy end of your sport, you are very lucky in that you get opportunities to not just represent any brand, but represent brands that I think can add to your performance. And that was always my goal, to partner with companies that ultimately would make me go quicker, because that's the goal, right? As an athlete, it's about performance. But to still have their support now is very humbling, and I'm very grateful.
Fantastic. Crowie, every guest of the Physical Performance Show issues listeners with a physical challenge for the week. It can be entry level or it can be more demanding. What's Crowie's physical challenge of the week going to be?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think, I think whether you have aspirations of being a world champion or if you're a beginner and you're just looking to dip your toe in and maybe do a local park run, you can't overstate the importance of core strength and stability. So I would challenge your listeners to go out for 20 minutes 3 times a week and undertake a core strength and stability routine. There's a lot of exercises. You can Google them. You'll find out what they are. But usually they involve a Swiss ball or a lot of one-legged stuff, just to really build some strength into those smaller muscles around the pelvis, and not just strength, but activation, getting them to turn on and stay turned on to really support the pelvis. That's the foundation of power and performance around your lower girdle, your pelvis. And, I once heard a really great analogy from Kai Hurst, he's a bit of a sporting legend in Australia. He went to the Olympics for open water swimming. He had an amazing career as a surf sport athlete, and now he's crewing on an America's Cup yacht. I once heard him say that you can't fire a cannon off a canoe. I think it's a great analogy. You need a stable base of support to generate power and speed. So I would challenge your listeners to incorporate a little core strength and stability routine into their training regimes.
Brilliant. And that actually answers, Crowie, a listener question from Sergio, which was, what's Craig's recommendation for strength training for triathletes? He did ask, in addition, is it an all-year thing or is it just in the building phase?
Yeah, I think strength's one of those things, particularly as you get older, it's one of the things that diminish. And I've always believed that triathlon is a strength-based sport. You're always, whatever level and whatever age, you need to incorporate some really specific work all year round. Obviously, the nature of training and periodization is you have to put it into your schedule where it works the best, and it's going to complement the other sessions and not be counterproductive. And obviously your racing schedule, you want to build that strength in and then maintain it and not fatigue your legs leading into a race. But certainly as I got older, I supplemented my specific strength training with work in the gym. I think there's a lot of good exercises in the gym where the strength gains transfer very well to the 3 disciplines in triathlon. And I think it's a very time effective. I know a lot of people who are in the corporate world or who work, may have access to a gym during their lunch hour. So I think in a 45-minute routine 3 times a week, a really strength-focused program, you can build triathlon-specific strength in the gym. But I think it's something you need to give some thought to, maybe get some advice how you fit it into your program so it's complementary and not counterproductive to your other sessions.
Brilliant. Craig, you have been very generous with your time and certainly around your busy life schedule there. Certainly appreciate it on behalf of myself, the listeners. You're a true gentleman of not just the sport of triathlon, of which you're an incredible ambassador, but also in sport in general. Certainly an inspiration for so many. So thank you for sharing so generously on the show.
Mate, thanks for having me on. I appreciate your time and it's been a pleasure. It's been good to chat. Thank you.
So there you have it, another episode of the Physical Performance Show. I trust you enjoyed Craig's sharings today. What an absolute champion, full of such wisdom, and what a remarkable career he's had to date. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please let myself know. You can catch me on social at Brad_beer or on email b.beer@pogophysio.com.au, and also let Craig know, Crowie. Tag him in on social. He's easy to follow at Crowie Alexander on Instagram. And also jump over to pogophysio.com.au to check out the show notes, including links to Sans Ego, Craig's online coaching community and training platform, and some videos of Craig's historic victories and links that we referred to throughout the episode. If today was your first time tuning in to the Physical Performance Show, then a massive welcome. If it was your 102nd time tuning in, then a massive thank you for your ongoing support. A special request: if you did enjoy this episode today and you know someone in your world who would take some learnings from it, be inspired, be educated, be informed, then please share the episode. It's easy to do. You can hit share from within your favourite podcast player, and on any smartphone or device, share away. That would mean a lot to myself and also Craig. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you are enjoying the Physical Performance Show from within inside your app, and you will get each and every episode updated live each and every week to your device. If you've been enjoying the show, then please consider leaving a review on iTunes. You can do this now. It's never been easier. Right from your phone or smart device, simply by visiting the iTunes store, picking the show and clicking on ratings and review. 1 star if you think it's okay, and 5 stars if you've been finding it to be great. I personally enjoy reading all the ratings and reviews and get a real kick and buzz. It's certainly my oxygen week in, week out in bringing the Physical Performance Show to you. So a massive thanks to those that have left reviews. If you're considering leaving one, please do it this week. That'd be fantastic. And a big thanks in particular this week to one of the surf Ironman modern day legends, guest of the show on episode 1 and 101, and that is Mr. Alistair Day, 4 times Coolangatta Gold champion. Crowie referenced the joy that he took from viewing the Coolangatta Gold in his early days of his sporting career. So I think it's quite ironic that today's reviewer of the week is Ali Day. Ali rated the program 5 stars. I hope that's not just because Ali's been a dual featured guest, but Ali's comments, great show. Brad has an epic approach to interviews that really engage listeners. Great questions providing awesome insights into the life and journey of athletes. Keep it up. Thanks so much, Ali. And another one that's come through here from Captain Kyle. Captain Kyle's rated the show 5 stars. Inspiring, insightful, and intentional. 3 key ingredients when it comes to podcasts, and you're nailing them. Not to mention the energy that you bring to each episode, which keeps them engaging. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much, Kyle and Ali. A big thank you to the team that make the Physical Performance Show possible every week. Susan Wilkin on all things administration, Matthew Olding on all things graphic design, and Daryl Misson, our audio engineer extraordinaire. A big thanks again to our show sponsors, Normatec Recovery and Pogo Physio. Podcasts, whilst they're free to download, they are certainly not free to produce. And so thank you, Normatec Recovery, and of course, Pogo Physio, for making this possible. Lastly, if you're into running, you can pick up your copy of my running and jogging bestseller, You Can Run Pain-Free, over on Audible or iBooks, and of course, the paperback versions domestically from pogophysio.com.au or Amazon, and of course, the Kindle versions across all platforms. To say thanks for tuning in to the Physical Performance Show, if you head over to pogophysio.com.au and wish to pick up a copy, there you can receive 50% off the recommended retail price, which is normally $24.95, by simply adding the promo code, one word, POD Pod 2018, all lowercase. You Can Run Pain-Free is 330 pages of exploring a 5-step framework which I have discovered over 12 years as a physiotherapist and 2 decades in physical performance. Helps runners do what's on the cover, and that is enjoy injury-free and faster running. Coming up on next week's episode of the Physical Performance Show, I share a conversation with you that I had with Rugby League NRL star Nathan Friend. I caught up with Nathan in person here at Pogo Physio, and we spoke through his remarkable career. We're jumping from Craig Alexander to the football pitch. One commonality between these great athletes is their longevity and their meticulous approach. Nathan played 242 games across 3 clubs, the Gold Coast Titans, New Zealand Warriors and the Melbourne Storm. And he was also the most played Gold Coast Titan in history with 102 games for the club. So it's a great chat. We go into nutrition and a whole bunch of things with some funny stories. You're going to really enjoy it. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.